Hi, my name's Ed Johns from ButtJoints.com. My friends over at the Working Hands podcast are holding a contest called the Make What You Fear Challenge. The contest is not necessarily about being skilled, but it's intended to get makers out of their comfort zone and encourage them to use materials that they normally wouldn't use. So for instance, myself as a woodworker, I might want to try metal or leather. Now this video is part of my submission. As an aspiring YouTube content maker, I think it's very important to go over the checklist of things that are necessary for a successful YouTube video. First, we'll start off with an untied work boot. Next, we have a very full and perfectly matched.
Aww.
Next, we have a very expensive designer flannel shirt that has no remnants of any work whatsoever. To get all of those views and clicks and subscribes from all those sponsors, you need a flat brimmed hat. Oh. And last but not least, to make sure that your audience knows that you're a professional craftsman, you need a workshop that is perfectly organized, perfectly clean, and has no sawdust in it.
Boo!
Now for this project, I'm going to be making 2 knives and 2 sheaths. The metal will come from woodworking tools, one being a saw blade and a ferrous rasp. I'll do that 2 ways, one with stock removal, one with forging. I'll use epoxy 2 ways. The fabric will be cut-resistant gloves because it's real meta. I'll do leather knife sheath 2 ways, and this YouTube video, which is intended to be an overview, not necessarily a tutorial, because there's over 50 hours of work in this video. We're going to move fast, so let's make what you fear. Well, the first thing to do is make a little heat treating forge using soft block. One tip here is don't whack it too hard because it will break. Alex Garland has an excellent series of videos on this, so go check his page out. But basically, I used a hole saw to core out the inside. You drill a hole in the side for a torch, and you light it up and see what you can burn. Now this moment here was a little nerve-wracking, but it worked, and it got hot enough to heat up some metal. So with that done, we moved on to the saw blade knife, and this grinding process wasn't as much fun as it seems on video. And we went through a couple wheels and shot sparks all over my wood shop. Now here you can see where we're at. The file knife got a similar treatment. You ground that out with a cutting wheel, and you could really see where the hard spots on the file were, as your wheel would basically just disappear. Now this is the annealing process. Basically we're making the metal softer. You heat it up till it's non-magnetic, and then you take it out and you let it cool by itself. Now here we just need a little extra cleanup using various woodworking tools. Now it's time to head up to the world famous Blackthorn Resort and Maker Camp. This was a hammer-in, and if you haven't been to one of these events, you really need to go. It's just a truly magical place where all makers, regardless of skill level, are on an equal playing field. People are willing to help you and make your dreams come true. And here you see my first attempt at moving metal with a hammer. This is Adam, Uncle Sam Metalworks, who's on Forge and Fire. A really nice guy who would help me out all day long. And you could draw your own comparisons between this experience and Team Chad there. I'll leave that up to the audience. Next, it was time to move on to the grinder for the stock removal portion of the saw blade knife. Here, Adam and I are just bonding on grinder like 2 men should. So when I got back home, we drilled some holes in the handles for pins to hold the scales on, and then we moved on to the heat treating process. There's the quench on the saw blade knife. That one wasn't too climactic. Temper in the oven, take some of that hardness out. The file knife needed a little bit of cleanup with a Dremel, no big deal. Just make that finger groove nice and round. And then we moved on to putting the holes into the file knife. Next comes a quench attempt number 1, which resulted in significant warping of the handle. There wasn't enough oil there. I heated it back up, had to add a little extra heat with a second torch. And then people really like my homemade anvil here that was laying around in my backyard. Now we moved on to the most horrible part of this process, which was sanding. Basically, I threw anything abrasive at these knives that I had, and unfortunately, it resulted in learning that hand sanding was the most effective method with many, many grits and many, many hours of sanding. So I'll save you all the footage, but I want to give you a taste here. Basically, it was the old-fashioned way of working up through the grits, and eventually it did kind of come up nice and shiny. That's quencher tip number 2, sideways, which also did not work out. And of course, my hand's in the way, but this also put a pretty significant curve into the knife. Now, thanks to Tony at Woodland Iron, give me some advice. I needed about 4 gallons of oil in this bucket, and this quenched satisfactory. Still a tiny bit of curve in the knife. Next, we moved on to the DIY micarta handles with the cut-resistant gloves. This was a messy process, but basically, you impregnate everything with epoxy, get it as smooth as you can, and then we put it in a press. I ended up just using my hands instead of that putty knife. Wrapped it up in wax paper in this little press I made, and then you'll see Bryce's hammer here. That's a pretty sweet little tool. Now, while the handles were curing, we moved our attention back to the file knife, and guess what happened? Yep, sanding, sanding, sanding. Basically used all the tools that I had, wire brushes, Dremel. I don't think I have any more Dremel wheels left, but you can eventually see that the shine did come out. And this little grinder quickly burned out after this video, and now we're back to unmolding the micarta. Now, what happened during this project is the fingertips of these gloves actually made a really cool pattern, which I ended up using. So now here is my new grinder, very powerful, and a shiny knife. We move on to just shaping the handles on the bandsaw. Now that we're close, we'll put some holes in the micarta for the pins, and we'll move on to gluing up. Now, if you're going to glue up a knife handle like this, don't use 4-minute epoxy. Get yourself something with a little bit more working time, because this process was kind of nerve-wracking because you had to move so quickly. Just back to the bandsaw for some more shaping, carving, knocking off the edges, and I'll let you guess what comes next. Yep, that's right, sanding, sanding, sanding. If I say I never want to sand another knife again, now you know why. This was the same old process where you just work your way up through the grits eventually, and then another quick sharpen, and this knife is done. Quick status check on where we are with the file knife. Now this was plan B here. I added some brass hardware to the holes in the handles and put it in a press that I made and poured in epoxy. Now this took about 4 micro pours to keep the epoxy clear, but it came out. The demolding process is always a little bit violent, but we got it out, and then we headed over to the bandsaw to start shaping the handles. I needed a break from sanding, so we moved on to a sheath for the saw blade knife. Now this is just your basic fold-over knife sheath. Head over to the Art of Craftsmanship channel for really intense tutorials. This is more of an overview, but hey, some sanding there too. This came out really cool though. A little wet molding to get that sheath perfect fit, and then we are done with this knife. I'm not even going to say the word. You know what's going on here. We eventually went up to 12,000 grits, so you can just watch here as the clarity comes up. Little oil, and thankfully we're done. Then we moved on to some more leather work for the sheath for the file knife. The main difference here is that this was a hand-stamped basket weave pattern, and keeping the line straight was a little bit of a challenge, and also the layout is something that I learned. Wanted something pretty dramatic, so we used blue leather dye to dye the whole thing. And this belt loop is a separate piece. That totally was intentional, and it was definitely not a overlooked item on the initial cutout. So some more saddle stitching, 1,000 holes, glue, and this is basically just putting your standard knife sheath together. And we ended up doing a little bit of wet molding just so that handle fits in there nice. Now for the retention element, I used a spring plunger and a piece of copper tubing. The design inspiration was a level 3 retention holster for a pistol. This is basically one shot. You're seeing it as I fiddled with it, and it came out actually better than I expected. A little nut in the bolt, that little spring plunger, and the open and closure action. So after this, this sheath was basically done. Now, what kind of knife maker would I be if I didn't include a testing portion to my video? So, I hope you guys enjoy breakfast. Thanks for watching my video. Be sure to like and subscribe if you want, or don't. It doesn't really matter to me. Make what you fear.